Have you ever been in a room so familiar that you could walk through it blindfolded, yet suddenly feel like you don't belong there anymore? That was exactly how I felt the first time my daughter whispered to me, "Papa, there are people in my room at night." I am a professor at a university. My life has always revolved around books, lectures, research, and guiding students. I have never been the kind of man to believe in ghost stories. Paranormal experiences belonged, in my mind, to the realm of folklore and imagination. But what unfolded in my home, within the walls I had always considered safe, forced me to question everything I thought I knew about the world. It began when my daughter, a bright and diligent student in 12th grade, was preparing for her board examinations. She had always been serious about her studies, and during that time, her routine was intense. Late nights, heavy textbooks spread across her desk, and long hours of quiet silence broken only by the scratch of her pen. At first I thought her complaints were simply the result of exhaustion and stress, but soon her whispers grew into trembling confessions that no parent could ignore. One night, long past midnight, she came to my room with her face pale and her hands cold. She said shadows circled around her bed while she tried to revise her notes. At first I tried to reassure her. I told her it was her imagination, that fatigue can trick the mind, that shadows from the streetlights outside can play strange tricks on the walls. But she shook her head firmly and said, "No, Papa, these are not just shadows. They look like people. Their bodies stretch and grow taller, and they move closer every night." Her words unsettled me, but I convinced myself that her fear was psychological. She had exams, she was overworked, she was vulnerable. I told her to sleep in our room that night, and she did. I thought the matter would end there, but the shadows followed her back the next night. She returned again, her lips trembling, as she described how the shadows were no longer vague outlines but shapes of men, tall, towering, faceless figures that seemed to grow in height until they nearly touched the ceiling. Worse still, she claimed that as she lay in her bed, the mattress itself shook beneath her as though something invisible had gripped it. The first time she told me this, I almost laughed nervously. A shaking bed sounded too much like something from a horror movie. But the fear in her eyes silenced me. It was the kind of fear that children cannot fake. I went to her room with her and switched on all the lights. Everything seemed normal. The books lay scattered, her notebooks were open, and the only shadows I could see were my own. She begged me not to leave her alone, so I sat beside her bed until she fell asleep. I waited for hours, staring at the walls, at the ceiling, listening for the faintest creak. Nothing happened while I was there. I began to wonder if these entities revealed themselves only when she was alone. Days turned into weeks, and her encounters with the shadows grew more disturbing. Sometimes she saw them standing silently in corners, merging into one another, forming a circle around her bed. Sometimes she felt an icy draft sweep across her room, though the windows were closed. She complained of hearing whispers in the dark, voices too low to understand, but too real to dismiss. My rational mind kept resisting these accounts. I told myself hallucinations, sleep paralysis, the overactive mind of a tired teenager. But then something happened that shattered all my explanations. It was my son. One night he burst into my room, breathless and terrified. He was younger, not yet in high school, and he had never before spoken of anything supernatural. But that night he repeated my daughter's words almost exactly. He said shadows circled around his bed, that they elongated until they became giant figures, and that his bed shook beneath him. He said he tried to shout, but his voice felt trapped in his throat. At that moment, all my theories collapsed. How could two children in different rooms on different nights describe the same unnatural phenomenon? I began to notice changes in them both. My daughter grew restless, her eyes heavy with sleeplessness, her grades slipping despite her best efforts. My son refused to sleep alone. Both of them started leaving their room doors open at night, insisting on a faint glow of light in the hallway. I could no longer deny what was happening. Something beyond my understanding had entered our home. I decided to observe more closely. One night, I sat quietly in my daughter's room after she had gone to sleep. The clock ticked past midnight, and the silence thickened. I forced myself to stay awake, my eyes fixed on the walls. At first, nothing stirred, but then I noticed it. The corners of the room darkened, not like the dimming of light, but like patches of blackness crawling outward. Slowly the shadows stretched and merged, forming outlines. They grew taller, their heads almost brushing the ceiling. My heart pounded as I realized I was seeing them too. I blinked several times, rubbed my eyes, even adjusted my glasses, but they did not disappear. And then the bed shook. It was subtle at first, like the vibration of a distant train, but soon it grew into a visible trembling. My daughter stirred in her sleep, her breathing uneven. I wanted to wake her, but I was frozen. The shadows seemed to notice me. I cannot explain why, but I felt their attention shift toward me. The air thickened, my chest tightened, and for the first time in my life I felt utterly powerless. In that instant, every lesson I had ever taught, every book I had ever read, every logical framework I had built around myself crumbled. There was no rational explanation for what I was witnessing. The figures did not attack me. They did not move closer. They simply stood, circling, swaying slightly, as though bound to some ritual. Then, just as suddenly as they appeared, they faded into the walls. The bed grew still, the air lightened. I rushed to switch on the lights, and everything was normal again. My daughter slept soundly, unaware of what had just happened. But I knew. I had seen them. From that night onward, I could no longer dismiss the experiences of my children. I tried prayers, recitations, even cleansing the rooms with incense. For a time, the disturbances lessened, but they never fully stopped. The shadows still returned, though less frequently, as if waiting for the right moment. The strangest part is that neither my wife nor I ever experienced them directly, only the children. It was as if these beings fed on the fear of the young, drawn to their vulnerability. Perhaps that is why they chose my daughter first, when she was exhausted and burdened by exam pressure, and then turned toward my son. Years have passed since then, but the memory remains etched in my mind. My daughter eventually completed her exams and moved away for university. My son too grew older. The shadows no longer appear as often, or perhaps we have learned to ignore them. But even now, there are nights when I pass by their old rooms and feel a shiver run down my spine, as though unseen eyes are still watching. I used to think my home was only bricks and mortar, a safe shelter for my family. Now I know it is also a space that can hold memories, energies, and presences we cannot comprehend. I am a professor. I was trained to believe in reason, in what can be proven. Yet, when I look back on those nights, on the trembling beds and the towering shadows, I realize that knowledge has its limits. Some truths are not written in books. Some truths reveal themselves only when darkness falls and the silence of the night allows what hides beyond our world to slip through. And so, whenever I stand before my students now and speak of knowledge, I remind myself that there are realms we cannot explain, realms that demand not analysis but humility. Because in my own home, I saw them, shadows that grew into giants, shadows that circled my children, shadows that shook the ground beneath us. And though they have faded, the awe they left behind still lingers. Even today, I wonder, were they ever truly gone, or are they simply waiting for the night we least expect them to return?